A little girl of only 7 years old makes a shocking revelation about a powerful millionaire. Nobody believes her until evidence begins to surface. The truth is so frightening that the police act immediately. And in just a few minutes, the most influential man in the city is behind bars. If this story interests you, subscribe to the channel to receive all our exciting stories. Continuing. From the penthouse of the most luxurious building in New York City, Richard Montgomery observed the city through the enormous glass windows of his private office. At 52 years old, he had built a business empire that had made him one of the most influential men in the country. His public image was impeccable. Dedicated philanthropist, visionary entrepreneur, and for the past 3 years, devoted husband to Hannah, a beautiful architect 15 years his junior. What few knew was that behind that facade of perfection was a man obsessed with control. In the privacy of his home, Richard revealed a domineering personality that silently suffocated his family. Hannah, once an independent and assertive professional, now lived in her husband's shadow, who had subtly convinced her to abandon her promising career to devote herself exclusively to their home. But it was Sophia, Hannah's daughter from her first marriage, who suffered the most from her stepfather's oppressive presence. At 7 years old, the once cheerful and spontaneous girl had become introverted and silent. Her eyes, which once shone with curiosity, now carried a weight that no child should know. The change in Sophia's behavior didn't go unnoticed by Mrs. Martha, the housekeeper who had worked for the Montgomery family for decades. The lady, with her 60 years of life experience, observed with growing concern the changes in family dynamics since Richard had taken full control of the house. "Sophia, dear, you've barely touched your lunch today," Mrs. Martha commented on a particularly tense afternoon as she collected the plates from the table. The girl just shrugged, her small fingers playing distractedly with the linen napkin. "I'm not hungry, Martha." The housekeeper exchanged a significant look with Hannah, who seemed absorbed in her own thoughts across the table. "Mrs. Hannah, the girl is getting thinner every day." "She's fine, Martha," Hannah responded automatically, as if repeating a mantra she had memorized. "Richard says it's just a phase. He knows the best doctors. He knows what's best for us." At that moment, the sound of Richard's firm footsteps echoed down the hallway. Sophia immediately shrank in her chair, while Hannah nervously adjusted her hair and forced a smile. "Family," Richard's deep voice filled the room. "I have extraordinary news." He entered the dining room with his usual imposing presence, wearing an impeccably tailored Italian suit. "I've just closed a deal to build the largest children's rehabilitation center in the country. The press is already buzzing. They want to do a special feature on our family." Hannah applauded politely, though her eyes showed a shadow of apprehension. "How wonderful, darling. When will the interview be?" "Next week," he replied, his eyes narrowing as he noticed Sophia's almost untouched plate. "And I expect everyone to be prepared to demonstrate the harmony and happiness of our family. We can't disappoint the people who trust us, can we?" The veiled threat in his words didn't go unnoticed. Mrs. Martha, discreetly observing the scene from the pantry, felt her heart tighten. In her many years of service, she had learned to recognize the subtle signs of a family in distress. And now, more than ever, she was determined to find a way to help before it was too late. The rest of the lunch went by in a heavy silence, interrupted only by the clinking of cutlery and occasional comments from Richard about his philanthropic projects. Sophia remained motionless in her chair like a small statue, while Hannah mechanically agreed with everything her husband said. At the end of the meal, when Richard left for an important meeting, Mrs. Martha noticed something that alarmed her even more. A small drawing that Sophia had made in her school notebook, showing a family where the figures of the mother and the girl always appeared small and dark, while the figure of the adoptive father loomed dark and disproportionate over them. At the most prestigious private school in New York City, teacher Laura observed Sophia with growing concern during art class. The girl, once participative and creative, now isolated herself in a corner of the room, her drawings becoming increasingly dark and disturbing. That morning, while the other children painted cheerful family scenes with vibrant colors, Sophia used only dark tones on her sheet. Sophia, dear, do you want to tell me about your drawing? Laura approached gently, trying not to startle the student. The girl hesitated, her small fingers tightly gripping the black pencil. It's my house, she murmured almost inaudibly. Laura examined the drawing carefully. The Montgomery mansion was represented as an imposing and dark structure with windows that looked like watchful eyes. In the garden, 3 figures stood out, 2 very small ones which she presumed to be Sophia and Hannah, and a third disproportionately large, casting a shadow over the others. "And who are these people in the garden?" asked the teacher, maintaining a soft and welcoming tone. Sophia looked nervously from side to side before answering, "Me, Mommy, and Uncle Richard." She always refused to call him Dad or stepfather. At that moment, the school counselor, Dr. Beatrice, entered the room for a routine observation. Her experienced eyes immediately noticed the interaction between Laura and Sophia. After class, she called the teacher for a private conversation. "Laura, have you noticed changes in Sophia's behavior in recent months?" asked Beatrice, adjusting her delicate framed glasses. "Yes, many," Laura sighed, picking up a folder with the student's work. "She used to be a cheerful and communicative child. Now, it's as if she lived in constant fear. Her drawings have become increasingly disturbing." Beatrice examined the works with professional attention. "Have you tried talking to the mother?" Hannah came to the last parent-teacher conference accompanied by her husband, Laura explained. She barely spoke, while he dominated the entire conversation, explaining that Sophia was just adapting to the new family dynamic. The next day, during recess, an incident drew even more attention from the educators. Sophia was sitting alone in the courtyard when her best friend Julia approached to share a snack. When she saw her friend offer a chocolate, Sophia panicked. "I can't, Uncle Richard says sweets make me fat and ugly," she exclaimed, pushing the chocolate away. Julia, confused by her friend's reaction, ran to tell teacher Laura. The educator, increasingly worried, decided to carefully document each observation and unusual behavior of the student. Meanwhile, at the Montgomery mansion, Mrs. Martha continued her silent vigilance. One afternoon, she found Hannah crying, hidden in the library. "Mrs. Hannah," she approached cautiously, "you're not alone. There are people who can help." Hannah quickly wiped away her tears. "There's nothing wrong, Martha. Richard is an important man. He does so much for us. Sometimes I'm just too weak to keep up with his pace." The housekeeper noticed the finger marks on Hannah's arm, where Richard had gripped her tightly during an argument the night before. "Ma'am, I know a very discreet social worker who could—" "No!" Hannah interrupted abruptly. "Richard has contacts everywhere. If he finds out we talked to someone, I can't risk losing my daughter." The sound of a car parking in the garage made both women start. Richard had arrived home early. Hannah quickly recomposed her makeup, while Mrs. Martha returned to her chores, her heart heavy with the secret she carried. At school, Laura and Beatrice began to plan a cautious intervention. They knew they needed to act with extreme prudence, considering Richard Montgomery's influence in the city. Any wrong move could result in serious consequences for everyone involved. "We need to document everything," said Beatrice, organizing a specific folder. "Every drawing, every strange behavior, every word said by Sophia. We can't let this situation continue." Laura agreed, remembering Sophia's frightened look that morning. "But how do we face someone as powerful as Richard Montgomery? He practically controls the city." "With intelligence and strategy," Beatrice replied, "and most importantly, keeping Sophia and Hannah safe throughout the process." On an autumn morning, as the city began to wake up, Mrs. Martha arrived earlier than usual at the Montgomery mansion. She found Sophia sitting on the back steps, hugging her favorite teddy bear, watching the sunrise with distant eyes. "Little one, what are you doing awake so early?" asked the housekeeper, sitting down next to the girl. Sophia remained silent for a few moments before answering. "Uncle Richard said I don't deserve to sleep in my pretty bed, that disobedient girls sleep on the floor." Mrs. Martha's heart tightened. With contained tears, she hugged Sophia tenderly. "Come with me, I'll prepare a special hot chocolate for you." In the kitchen, while preparing the drink, Martha observed Sophia drawing in her notebook. The girl had developed her own code to express her feelings. Wilted flowers represented bad days, dark clouds symbolized Richard's oppressive presence, and small caged birds portrayed her and her mother. That same morning, at school, teacher, Laura found an unexpected ally. Claire, the new school psychologist, showed special interest in Sophia's case after observing one of her art therapy sessions. "These drawings are cries for help," Claire commented, analyzing the portfolio that Laura had compiled. Every line, every color chosen, tells a story of psychological oppression. The two professionals decided to join forces. Claire, with her experience in similar cases, knew they needed to build a solid support network before any more direct action. "We need to ensure that both Sophia and Hannah have somewhere to go when the situation explodes," she explained. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Hannah was living her own private hell. That afternoon, when trying to defend Sophia from another unfair criticism from Richard, she was humiliated in front of visitors. "Darling," Richard said with his artificial smile, "do you really think you know more about education than I do? Remember where you were when we met." Hannah swallowed her tears, remembering how her life had changed, from respected architect to a shadow of herself, living under her husband's constant control. Her bank accounts, her documents, her very identity, everything was under Richard's domain. At the most prestigious law firm in the city, a young lawyer named Rachel received an unexpected visit. Mrs. Martha, trembling with nerves but determined, presented a folder with meticulous records she had kept for months. Photos, notes, audio recordings made discreetly. "I know that Mr. Richard is one of the firm's biggest clients," said Martha, "but I can't stay silent anymore. That girl and her mother need help." Rachel examined the material with professional attention, her face hardening with each new piece of evidence. "Mrs. Martha, do you understand that this could cost you your job? Maybe even more than that?" "I understand, ma'am, but I've lived a long life, and I couldn't live in peace knowing I did nothing to help." The lawyer closed the folder with a heavy sigh. As one of the few women in a position of power at the firm, she knew well the weight of facing authoritarian figures. "I'll need more evidence, and we need to act with extreme caution. Mr. Montgomery has eyes and ears everywhere." At school, Sophia began to show small signs of trust with Claire, the psychologist. During a particularly significant session, the girl finally verbalized her fears through a story she created with puppets. "The princess and her mother lived in a beautiful castle," narrated Sophia, manipulating the dolls, "but the evil giant kept them imprisoned with invisible chains. He said it was to protect them, but really he wanted them to be alone and sad forever." Claire documented every word, every gesture, carefully building the puzzle that revealed the Montgomery family drama. Along with Laura, she began to prepare a detailed report that would be crucial for future legal actions. The tension in the Montgomery mansion increased day by day. Richard, always attentive to his public image, intensified his control over the family upon noticing small changes in Hannah and Sophia's behavior. Security cameras were installed in every room, and their outings became even more restricted. The interview for the special report on the Montgomery family was scheduled for that sunny Thursday afternoon. The mansion had been meticulously prepared, with fresh flowers in every room and a team of staff ensuring everything was impeccable. Richard personally supervised every detail, determined to maintain his image of exemplary philanthropist and dedicated family man. "Hannah, dear," he called, adjusting his Italian tie in front of the mirror, "make sure Sophia is wearing the dress I chose, and remember what we talked about regarding your behavior during the interview." Hannah nodded mechanically, climbing the stairs towards her daughter's room. She found Sophia sitting on the edge of the bed, already dressed in the elegant navy blue dress that looked more like a porcelain doll costume. "Sweetheart," Hannah whispered, fixing the girl's hair, "today we need to be very strong. Like in those warrior princess stories you love so much, remember?" Sophia just nodded, her eyes fixed on the floor. The silence between mother and daughter was interrupted by the arrival of the reporting team. Journalist Patricia Sanders, known for her investigative reports had been specially chosen by Richard, who believed he could control her as he did with everyone around him. "What a charming family," exclaimed Patricia upon seeing Hannah and Sophia descending the stairs. Her professional gaze, however, didn't fail to notice how the girl flinched at the slightest movement from her stepfather. The interview began in the luxurious winter garden. Richard dominated the conversation, speaking eloquently about his charitable projects and his dedication to the family. "Sophia brought a special light into our lives," he declared, placing a heavy hand on his stepdaughter's shoulder. "Isn't that right, dear?" The girl visibly trembled but forced a rehearsed smile. Patricia made a mental note, her suspicions growing with each interaction. During a moment when Richard went to take an important call, the journalist managed to get a few minutes alone with Hannah, apparently to talk about the house's decoration. "Mrs. Montgomery," she said in a low voice, "I noticed your hands tremble when your husband approaches. If you need help, I can—" "Everything is fine," Hannah quickly interrupted, her artificial smile barely hiding the panic in her eyes. "Richard is a busy man, sometimes a bit intense, but he loves us very much." At that same moment in Rachel's office, the lawyer was examining the evidence provided by Mrs. Martha. Among the documents, she found something disturbing: records of other families who had tried to denounce Richard in the past, but mysteriously gave up or moved to distant places. "We need to act with even more caution," she muttered to herself, typing a coded email to a trusted contact at the district attorney's office. Back at the mansion, the interview continued with Richard proudly showcasing his philanthropic projects. It was then that Sophia, exhausted by the weight of the charade, began to cry silently. "She's just tired," Richard quickly explained, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Hannah, take her to rest." But before Hannah could react, Patricia intervened. "Sophia, dear, how about showing me your room? We can take some beautiful photos up there." In the room, away from Richard's controlling eyes, Sophia relaxed minimally. The journalist noticed the revealing details: the security cameras at strategic angles, the absence of personal objects, the meticulously organized form that seemed more like a golden prison than a child's room. Meanwhile, downstairs, Mrs. Martha observed everything with apprehension. Over the years, she had become an expert at reading the signs of tension in the house. She noticed how Richard controlled Hannah's every movement with significant looks, how his voice acquired a veiled, threatening tone when contradicted. The housekeeper took advantage of a moment of distraction to discreetly slip a note into Patricia's pocket, containing a phone number and a single phrase: "Not everything is as it seems." At the end of the afternoon, when the reporting team had already left, Richard gathered the family in the living room. His behavior, previously controlled, began to show cracks. "I hope everyone understood the importance of this report for our image," he said, pouring himself a drink. "We cannot allow anything, absolutely anything, to tarnish our reputation." The look he gave Hannah and Sophia made the implicit threat clear. What no one realized was that Patricia, before leaving, had left a small activated recording device under an armchair, recording every word of that private conversation. The morning after the interview, an extraordinary meeting was taking place in the school's coordination room. Laura, Claire, and Beatrice had invited Rachel, the lawyer, and Patricia, the journalist, for a confidential conversation. Each brought their own discoveries about the Montgomery case. "The recordings I got yesterday are disturbing," Patricia began, connecting her recorder. As soon as the team left, Richard showed his true face. The contrast between his public and private persona is frightening. Rachel nodded, spreading documents on the table. "I found a pattern. In the last 10 years, 3 different families tried to denounce him for abusive behavior. All suddenly gave up. Some even moved to other countries." "Sophia has been showing increasingly worrying signs," Claire, the psychologist, added. "Her drawings and stories reveal an extremely controlling domestic environment. She has developed several defensive behaviors." Laura picked up her record folder. "Just yesterday, during class, Sophia had an anxiety attack when she accidentally spilled paint on her uniform. She kept repeating, 'Uncle Richard will be angry. Uncle Richard Retry Claude hit the max length for a message and has paused its response. You can write continue to keep the chat going. Just yesterday, during class, Sophia had an anxiety attack when she accidentally spilled paint on her uniform. She kept repeating, Uncle Richard will be angry, Uncle Richard will be angry. Beatrice, the coordinator, maintained a grave expression. We need to act, but with extreme caution. Richard Montgomery isn't just rich. He has powerful connections. One wrong move could worsen the situation for Sophia and Hannah. On the other side of the city, Mrs. Martha was secretly meeting with her niece, Amanda, a social worker specializing in domestic violence cases. Aunt, what you've told me is very serious, Amanda said, taking notes, but we need concrete evidence. In cases involving influential people, the evidence needs to be irrefutable. I've been keeping a diary, Martha replied, taking a worn notebook from her purse. Every incident, every word, every strange behavior. Dates, times, witnesses when possible. Meanwhile, at the Montgomery mansion, Hannah found something that made her tremble. A document forgotten in Richard's office printer. It was a unilateral custody request for Sophia, already filled out with her forged signature. He wants to take my daughter away from me, she whispered to herself, her hands shaking as she tucked a copy of the document into her purse. At school, Sophia was participating in a special activity organized by Claire. The psychologist had created a safe corner in her room, where children could express their feelings through art and play. Sophia, do you want to tell us about this house you drew? Claire asked softly, observing the girl's new work. It's a house with glass walls, Sophia explained in a low voice. Everyone thinks it's beautiful from the outside, but inside, everything is broken. The metaphor didn't go unnoticed by the professional, who carefully documented every word. That afternoon, Rachel received an unexpected visit to her office. Hannah, visibly nervous, had gathered the courage to seek legal help after finding the document. I can't let him take my daughter, she said, her hands clutching the purse where she kept the copy of the request. But I'm afraid. Richard has so much power. Mrs. Hannah, Rachel responded firmly, there's a network of people prepared to help you. You're not alone in this battle. At the newspaper office, Patricia was discreetly working on an investigative piece about businessmen who used charity work as a facade for public image manipulation. Although she didn't directly cite names, each example echoed Richard Montgomery's practices. The net was beginning to close, but Richard, in his arrogance, remained oblivious to the machinations happening behind the scenes. His immediate concern was the big charity gala he would organize over the weekend, where he intended to announce his newest project, a support center for families in vulnerable situations. The irony of the situation didn't escape any of the women involved in the protection network that was forming. Each one, in her area of expertise, contributed to building a solid case, gathering evidence, and strengthening the support ties that would be fundamental for what was to come. The most luxurious ballroom of the magnificent hotel shone with the impeccable decoration of the charity gala organized by Richard Montgomery. The cream of New York society circulated among tables decorated with rare orchids, crystal glasses, clinked in superficial toasts, and photographers captured every rehearsed smile of the illustrious guests. Hannah, wearing a navy blue dress chosen by Richard, remained by her husband's side like a porcelain doll. Sophia, also in navy blue, seemed even smaller in her formal dress, clinging to her mother's hand as if seeking protection. Darling. Smile more, Richard muttered through clenched teeth, maintaining his own cordial expression. We're the perfect family, remember? Patricia Sanders circulated through the event with her notepad, apparently covering the social event, but her astute eyes captured every interaction of the Montgomery family. She noticed how Richard controlled Hannah and Sophia's movements through subtle gestures and intimidating looks. At a discreet table in the corner of the ballroom, Rachel, the lawyer, was conversing with some strategic guests. Her presence had been carefully planned. As a representative of one of the city's largest law firms, her participation in the event was natural. The new family support center will be revolutionary, Richard was speaking on stage, his voice laden with false emotion. I believe that every child deserves a safe and loving home. In the audience, Amanda, the social worker, exchanged a significant look with her Aunt Martha, who had served as an escort for the event. The two knew the truth behind that facade of benevolence. During the cocktail hour, Sophia momentarily escaped her stepfather's vigilance and found refuge near the dessert table, where Claire, the school psychologist, was strategically positioned. "Aunt Claire," whispered the girl, showing the first genuine smile of the night. "Hi, little one," Claire responded softly. "How are you?" Before Sophia could answer, Richard appeared at her side, placing a heavy hand on her shoulder. "Sophia, dear, you shouldn't bother the guests." "Not at all, it's no bother," Claire intervened, maintaining a professional tone. "Sophia is one of my most special students." The look Richard gave the psychologist was glacial. "Ah, so you're from the school. Interesting. Perhaps we should schedule a meeting to discuss Sophia's development." Hannah, who was observing the scene from afar, felt a chill run down her spine. She knew that tone of voice well. It was the same one Richard used before making drastic decisions that affected their lives. On the other side of the ballroom, Beatrice, the school coordinator, was conversing with some members of the educational board, subtly planting seeds of doubt about the true nature of Richard's social projects. The party reached its peak when Richard announced a substantial donation to children's causes. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment when he, Hannah, and Sophia took the stage, the perfect image of the happy family. "This is just the beginning," Richard declared into the microphone. "Soon, we'll announce even more significant changes in our family life." Hannah felt her heart race, remembering the custody document she had found. Her hands began to visibly tremble, something that didn't go unnoticed by Patricia, who was photographing the moment. After the speech, during the photo session, Sophia began to show signs of exhaustion. The tight dress, uncomfortable shoes, and constant pressure to maintain appearances were too much for a child her age. "We need to go," Hannah whispered to Richard, noticing her daughter's state. "Not yet," he replied between smiles for the cameras. "We have to keep up appearances until the end." It was at this moment that Sophia, overwhelmed by everything, began to cry silently. Tears streamed down her face as she tried in vain to maintain the smile that Richard demanded. The scene, seemingly trivial to most of those present, was carefully recorded from different angles. Patricia with her professional camera, Amanda with her discreetly positioned cell phone, and even some guests who, unknowingly, captured evidence of the family's discomfort. At the end of the night, as guests said their goodbyes, Richard maintained his perfectly rehearsed smile, but his eyes revealed contained fury. Sophia's behavior during the party hadn't met his expectations of perfection. The morning after the charity gala, the tension in the Montgomery mansion was palpable. Richard had spent the entire night reviewing news and photos from the event, obsessively looking for any sign that could tarnish his carefully constructed image. "This is unacceptable," he vociferated, throwing the newspaper onto the breakfast table. A photo showed Sophia crying during the official photos, with the suggestive headline, "Not all tears are of joy." Hannah, seated on the other side of the table, kept her eyes lowered, her hands trembling as she held her teacup. Sophia had refused to leave her room that morning, claiming to be sick. "That journalist," Richard muttered, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "She was everywhere, asking too many questions. And that school psychologist. We need to take Sophia out of that institution immediately." "But Richard," Hannah dared to intervene, "Sophia loves the school, her friends, her teachers." "Are you questioning me?" he approached threateningly. "After everything I've done for you. You were a failed architect with a daughter to raise alone. I gave you everything." At that moment, Mrs. Martha entered the room, pretending not to have heard the discussion. "Mr. Richard, the school principal is on the phone. He says it's urgent." Richard left to take the call in his office, leaving Hannah in tears. Martha took advantage of the moment to approach. "Mrs. Hannah," she whispered urgently, "the time has come. We can't wait any longer." Hannah wiped away her tears, a new determination arising in her eyes. "You're right, Martha. But how? He controls everything. Our documents, our accounts. We already have a plan. Martha revealed, discreetly sliding a card with a phone number. "Trusted people are prepared to help, but we need to act today." In the office, Richard discovered that the school had initiated an internal investigation into the well-being of its students, with special attention to signs of stress and anxiety. Although his name wasn't directly mentioned, he knew he was being watched. Meanwhile, at the newspaper office, Patricia was finalizing her investigative piece. Years of similar stories, anonymous testimonies, and compromising documents formed a devastating puzzle about Richard Montgomery's true nature. At school, Sophia finally found the courage to trust Claire during a special therapy session. "Uncle, Richard said he's going to send me to a boarding school," sobbed the girl. "Far away from Mommy, far from everyone. He said it's for me to learn to be a better girl." Claire maintained her calm, although her heart was racing. "Sophia, you're being very brave in telling me this. We're going to help you and your mother, I promise." The psychologist immediately contacted Rachel, who had already prepared an emergency protective measure. The lawyer, anticipating the possibility of Richard trying to separate mother and daughter, had gathered enough evidence to prevent any legal action from him. Early in the afternoon, Richard received a call that left him visibly disturbed. His contacts at the newspaper had alerted him about the article that would be published the next day. In panic, he began making a series of calls trying to use his influence to prevent the publication. "Cancel everything," he shouted into the phone. "Use all necessary resources, but this article cannot go to print." While he was distracted with the calls, Hannah found the courage she needed. With trembling hands, she sent a message to the number Martha had given her. It was the signal everyone had been waiting for. In a matter of minutes, a carefully organized protection network began to move. Amanda, the social worker, activated the emergency protocols. Rachel prepared to present the necessary legal measures. Claire and the school team organized all the reports and evidence collected over the months. The plan was in motion, and there was no turning back. The facade built by Richard Montgomery was about to crumble, and for the first time in years, Hannah felt that she and Sophia might really have a chance at freedom. Evening was falling over New York City when Richard Montgomery realized something was different in the mansion. An unsettling silence hung in the air, and for the first time in years he felt he was losing control of the situation. His desperate calls to prevent the article's publication had not had any effect. Patricia Sanders had full editorial protection. "Hannah," he called, hurrying up the stairs. "Sophia, where are you?" In the master bedroom, he found open drawers and some of Hannah's important belongings missing. In Sophia's room, the girl's favorite teddy bear, which never left her bed, was also gone. "Martha!" he shouted, thundering down the stairs. "Where is my family?" The housekeeper, who had faithfully served the family for decades, met his gaze with a calmness that disconcerted him. "They finally found the courage to seek happiness, Mr. Richard." "What are you talking about, you meddling old woman?" He advanced threateningly, but was interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. At the door, a news team from the largest network in the country waited with cameras rolling. Beside them, Patricia Sanders held a thick folder of documents. "Mr. Montgomery," called the journalist, "we'd like to hear your version of some serious allegations we've received." Richard tried to maintain his composure, his artificial smile appearing automatically. "There must be some mistake. My press office—" "Your press office will also receive this evidence," Patricia interrupted, signaling for an assistant to distribute folders to the other journalists present, "including the documents about the families who were forced to move after trying to denounce you." In Rachel's office, Hannah and Sophia were protected, surrounded by a team of psychological and legal support. The girl, for the first time in a long time, allowed herself to smile genuinely while playing with other children in the specially prepared waiting room. "We managed to record everything on video," Amanda, the social worker, informed. "The cameras we installed in the mansion captured various episodes of psychological abuse. Richard won't be able to deny anything." Hannah, still trembling but determined, was signing the necessary documents to ensure her and her daughter's protection. "He'll try to use his power and influence," she murmured. "That's exactly why we acted on several fronts simultaneously," Rachel explained. "The news article, the legal processes, the school evidence, the testimonies of other victims. We've built a protection network that not even Richard Montgomery can break. Back at the mansion, Richard was facing his worst nightmare. The TV cameras were broadcasting live his reaction to the accusations, and each attempt to maintain his facade of a benevolent man only further evidenced his true controlling nature. "This is a conspiracy," he vociferated, losing his composure. "I don't know who you're dealing with." At that moment, police vehicles parked in front of the mansion. The officers brought search and seizure warrants, authorized by a judge who had received the evidence collected during months of secret investigation. Mrs. Martha observed the scene with a mixture of sadness and relief. Years of forced silence finally gave way to the truth. In her purse, she carried a flash drive with copies of all the evidence she had patiently collected over the years. At the law office, Claire was conducting a special session with Sophia, helping her process the events in a healthy way. "You were very brave," said the psychologist, watching the girl draw her first colorful work in months, a house with flowers in the garden and a bright sun in the sky. "Mommy was brave too," Sophia responded, adding two hand-in-hand figures to the drawing. "Can we be really happy now?" "Yes, dear," Hannah replied, hugging her daughter. "Now we can rebuild our life, our own way." Meanwhile, at the mansion, Richard watched helplessly as his carefully constructed facade of benevolence crumbled. The journalists were broadcasting live every moment of his fall, and his closest allies began to distance themselves, fearing being associated with the scandal. Patricia Sanders' special report aired in prime time, causing a devastating impact on New York society. The meticulously produced documentary exposed not only the Montgomery family case, but a disturbing pattern of behavior that extended over years. During our investigation, we discovered that Mr. Montgomery built his philanthropist reputation as a smokescreen, Patricia narrated. Behind the generous donations and charity events, there was a man who used his power and influence to control and manipulate those around him. The program interspersed anonymous testimonies from former employees, compromising documents, and analyses from behavior experts. The recordings obtained at the mansion, even without audio, clearly showed the pattern of intimidation that Richard exerted over Hannah and Sophia. In Rachel's office, a team of lawyers worked tirelessly, preparing legal measures to protect not only Hannah and Sophia, but all the other victims who were beginning to come forward. "It's impressive how a person can maintain such a convincing facade for so long," commented one of the lawyers, reviewing another testimony. "Fear is a powerful tool," Rachel replied, "but the truth always finds its way." At the psychological clinic where Sophia was in therapy, Claire was conducting a special session with other children who had gone through similar situations. Through art and play, they began to process their experiences and regain their self-esteem. "Look, what I drew?" Sophia proudly showed a colorful picture. "It's our new house where no one needs to be afraid." Hannah, observing her daughter through the therapy room's glass, cried silently. Beside her, Amanda offered professional and personal support. "You need to allow yourself to heal too," the social worker said gently. The trauma didn't just affect Sophia. The day after the report's broadcast, the country's main newspapers featured headlines about the case. Social media exploded with expressions of support for the victims and repudiation of Richard. His business partners quickly distanced themselves, fearing association with the scandal. In a meeting room at the district attorney's office, prosecutors analyzed the evidence presented by Rachel and her team. The case had transformed into a much larger investigation, involving not only domestic abuse but also possible fraud in social projects and misuse of public resources. "Each layer we remove reveals something even more disturbing," commented one of the prosecutors, examining financial documents. At the Montgomery mansion, now practically empty, Mrs. Martha supervised the removal of Hannah and Sophia's personal belongings. Each object carried memories, some painful, others precious. "I found this hidden in the back of the closet," she said to Hannah, handing her an old folder. Inside were the architectural projects that Hannah had developed before meeting Richard, professional dreams she had been forced to abandon. Maybe it's time to start over, Hannah murmured, leafing through the drawings with nostalgia. During a press conference, Beatrice, the school coordinator, announced the implementation of a special program for identifying and preventing abuse. The Montgomery case taught us that we need to be more attentive to subtle signs, she declared. No child should suffer in silence. Patricia Sanders continued to receive new testimonies and evidence. Her investigation had opened a Pandora's box, revealing a network of silence and complicity that permeated high society. Each story we uncover confirms the same pattern, she explained during a lecture. Powerful people using their influence to create an impeccable public image while practicing abuse behind closed doors. At the end of that week, a special meeting was held at the local community center. Dozens of people, including other victims of abusive relationships, gathered to share experiences and form a mutual support network. Sophia, seated between Hannah and Claire, curiously observed the other children playing freely. Her smile, once rare and forced, now appeared naturally, illuminating her face with a genuine joy that had long been suppressed. 6 months had passed since Hannah and Sophia left the Montgomery mansion. Spring was arriving in New York City, bringing with it not only flowers, but also new beginnings. In a cozy apartment in Brooklyn, mother and daughter were building their new life, free from the shadows of the past. Hannah had resumed her career as an architect, opening a small office specializing in social projects. Her first major work was the design of a shelter center for families in vulnerable situations, a genuine project, different from the facades that Richard used to create. "Mommy, look what I drew today." Sophia came running into her mother's office, carrying another of her colorful artworks. The drawing showed 2 smiling figures in front of a cheerful house with a garden full of flowers. "It's beautiful, my love," Hannah smiled, hugging her daughter. The therapy sessions with Claire had helped Sophia regain her natural joy. The girl had once again become a spontaneous child, her eyes now shining with the innocence proper to her age. At school, Sophia had become a kind of inspiration for other children. Her case, although never directly discussed, had led to the creation of an innovative awareness and emotional support program. "It's amazing how she has blossomed," Laura commented to Claire, watching Sophia play freely during recess. "It's as if we've given her colors back." Mrs. Martha, who had officially retired from domestic service, now dedicated her time to volunteer work at the community center. Her experience had become valuable in identifying and helping other families in similar situations. "Each story I hear reminds me of the importance of not staying silent," she said during a support group meeting. "Silence is the greatest ally of oppressors." Patricia Sanders' article had generated a series of positive changes in society. Several companies and institutions had implemented more rigorous verification programs for their philanthropic actions. The journalist had received several awards for her investigative work, but her greatest reward was seeing the real impact on people's lives. "The Montgomery case taught us that appearances can be deceiving," she declared in a lecture to journalism. "Students, our obligation is to investigate beyond the surface, to give voice to the silenced." Rachel, the lawyer who had fought so hard for the case, transformed her experience into a larger project. Her firm now maintained a division specialized in cases of psychological abuse and manipulation, offering free legal support for victims without resources. On a sunny afternoon, Hannah organized a small gathering in her new home. All the women who had formed that fundamental protection network gathered there: Claire, Laura, Beatrice, Patricia, Rachel, Amanda, and Mrs. Martha. Sophia circulated among them, distributing hugs and smiles. "Sometimes I wonder how I managed to live in that situation for so long," Hannah confessed to the group. "How I could let him control every aspect of our lives." "The important thing is that you found your strength," Claire replied. "And even more importantly, you showed Sophia that we can always start over." The apartment, although much smaller than the mansion, overflowed with life and human warmth. On the walls, Sophia's colorful drawings replaced the old expensive and impersonal artworks. On the shelves, Architectural projects mixed with children's books, telling the story of a life in reconstruction. On the balcony, as the sun set over the city, Hannah watched Sophia playing with other children from the building. The sound of their laughter was the sweetest music she had ever heard, the sound of freedom, of recovered innocence, of genuine happiness. "You know," Hannah said to Mrs. Martha, who had joined her on the balcony, "for the first time in years, I'm not afraid. Of tomorrow." The former housekeeper smiled, her eyes misty with emotion. "Tomorrow belongs to you now, and it will be exactly what you choose it to be." The group of women raised their glasses in a silent toast. They weren't just celebrating Hannah and Sophia's freedom, but a greater victory, the breaking of silence, the strength of female union, the real possibility of a new beginning. On the coffee table, Sophia's latest drawing perfectly captured the moment. A group of women holding hands, forming a protective circle around a small, smiling figure. At the top of the paper, written in childish handwriting, was a simple and powerful phrase, "My new family."